Welcome everybody to our webinar, Common European Data Spaces for Smart Manufacturing. And in this webinar, the focus will be on maintenance data. And you all have received the agenda. We will start with welcoming and introduction from Kilian and Philip. So I would like first to hand over to Kilian.
Thanks, Matthias. I hope you can all hear me well. Otherwise, give me a signal whether I need to change something. It's fine. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So a warm welcome from my side. My name is Kilian Groß. I'm the head of unit of DG Connect A2, where we're dealing with digitizing European industry and artificial intelligence. And here in our unit, we are trying to set up the data space for manufacturing. So we talk today about an important project which we'll envisage in the next time to come, because as you know, the data spaces are one of the priorities of our Commissioner Breton. So we see here a really important future task for us, where we would like to rely on your support and your advice and the information from your side. Today, as Matthias already has mentioned, it's the second workshop. We will concentrate on predictive maintenance. So we would like to understand what manufacturing data spaces could deliver in this particular area. We have mainly invited representatives from the machine tool industry and their associations, because we think for you it might be most relevant, and we would be very happy to have an open and frank discussion in order to see what you consider as obstacles or chances or tools we could use in order to deliver on this target. But perhaps before we start, let me quickly set a little bit the scene, so to give you the political background in which we are working. You may remember that on 19th of February, the Commission had presented the white paper on artificial intelligence together with a data strategy. And both were the first main actions of the new Commission on this new headline target, making Europe fit for the digital age. So I think it shows already the importance of the two acts, because these were the first ones where we wanted to deliver on the new digital strategy. And data and artificial intelligence, of course, belong together very closely, because data is essential. Data is essential in order to develop and use artificial intelligence. Since then, on data, in the data strategy, you find these data spaces, and one of the data spaces is the one we will discuss today, the manufacturing data space, where we would like to learn from you what else we can do in order to foster its development. The Commission will continue this work, of course. You know that we are planning, not our unit, but DG Connect is planning a data governance still this year, so we are very actively working on this to develop the topic further. And overall, of course, we have had some important developments, because on the financial side, you know, we have the Digital Europe program, which foresees as well financial support for these data spaces. And there we had, as you all know, at the European Summit on the European Council just in July, just a few days ago, we had an agreement on the next MFF and the recovery fund, the next generation fund. It still needs to be approved by the European Parliament. That will probably, hopefully, happen shortly after summer, and then we will have the means at our disposal to start to implement practically the different programs, and we're looking very much forward to that. So we were very grateful that the head of states could find an agreement just before summer, because otherwise it would have had further delays. In addition, this is not on a standalone basis. You have seen the Commission has already published an industrial strategy and an SME strategy as well in March of this year. So I think we have been quite active on the different work strands in order to foster the industrial activity. And here, this data space is, of course, an important point of this. As I said, this is not the first workshop. We had one on the 6th of May. We had, in the meantime, a number of bilateral discussions with industry associations. But we would like today to discuss a bit in a broader circle. And we would have, if I may say so, have the following objectives for today. We would like to identify a little bit the needs and the starting points for an industrial-grade data space in manufacturing, with a focus on maintenance data. So we would really like to hear your views on this. We would like a bit to hear your thoughts or your ideas on this. So please be frank, be open, come into the discussion. We want to have an open discussion. We have some introductory speeches and contributions, but it should really, the focus should be the discussion with you so that we really hear from you what you think. In particular, we would like to have your views on several manufacturing data spaces, how they can be defined, what should be the technical requirements, what should be the requirements in order to ensure trust, which kind of data are useful in your view to be shared, which data would you be willing to share? So to have first-hand experience is really for us a practice test we need, because we are reflecting on these things, but we want to know from you what you actually are doing, or what you would be willing to do in the future. So for us, this is a learning exercise. It's most useful if you're as outspoken and as clear as possible. So we wanted to have a limited circle today, and we want to have a really frank discussion. It's just for us to understand and to learn. So I'm looking very much forward to listen to you, and I don't want to take further time. And I hand over to Philipp Herz from CECIMO, who as well will give some opening words. Thanks a lot, and have a good discussion.
Yeah, it's up to me, I suppose. Do you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine, perfect. So thank you, Matthias, and for sure, thank you, Kilian. So I'm indeed Philip, and I'm the Director General of CECIMO. It's the European Association for Machine Tool Industries, but also for related manufacturing technologies. So also, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the common European data spaces for smart manufacturing. So special thanks, of course, to the staff of the European Commission, who have recognized the work of CECIMO and have invited us to support this event. I would also like to give a warm welcome to our members, to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Luigi Rankan from Micron and Mr. Tomi Kankainen from Fastens. They're two very active companies inside CECIMO. So they will share with us their experience on manufacturing data spaces and provide us with an example of provider and user data exchange, and then mainly focusing on maintenance data. Before we start, I will shortly introduce the work of CECIMO. So CECIMO brings together 15 national associations of machine tool builders, which represents around 1,500 manufacturing companies in Europe. So CECIMO monitors all EU legislation that affects our sector, striving to achieve the best market conditions for the machine tool industry and related manufacturing technology. So CECIMO acts not only on matters related to the conventional manufacturing industry, so metal working and metal forming, metal cutting, but also on digitalization, on cybersecurity, additive manufacturing or 3D printing, and sustainability. So as a representative of the machine tool industry and related manufacturing technologies, CECIMO actively promotes the competitiveness of our industry, which is closely linked to investments in technological innovation, as well as new sustainable solutions. Now, creating a Europe fit for the digital age is a complex puzzle with many interconnected pieces. And as with any puzzle, the whole picture cannot be seen unless all pieces are ultimately assembled. So the success of Europe's digital transformation will depend greatly on establishing effective frameworks that ensure the implementation of trustworthy technologies, which would certainly give business the confidence and the means to digitize their activities over the next 5 years. Data is the centerpiece of the digital transformation. It shapes how we produce, consume, and trade. Our businesses are even becoming increasingly data-driven. Now, one of the challenges that we face is not only accessing an ever-growing volume of data, but also learning the skills to use data effectively and employ it in future business endeavors. Future manufacturing innovation and growth will surely depend on how companies access and use data. Data flows, better data quality, and data management are vital for business. So CECIMO supports the digital single market agenda, as it fosters innovation and improves Europe's industrial policy. We believe that European-wide trust rules and mechanisms will be essential to encourage individuals and companies to create data pools for the common good. Let us pursue a policy framework that stimulates the uptake of data-driven business models in Europe that is central to supporting business growth, technological development, and social well-being too. Thank you very much. And I think I give back the word to Matthias.
Yes, thank you, Philip, and thank you, Kilian, for the introduction and the welcoming words. I would now like to start with a quick poll. Who's in our webinar? We have invited mainly the machine tool industry, as Kilian said, but as it was openly communicated, well, I want to know just from what type of organization you are. And while you react on the poll, I would also like to introduce how we are working in this webinar. Kilian already said that we want to discuss with you our thoughts about how to set up a data space for manufacturing. And with during the presentation, you should of course all stay muted, and it's also maybe good to stop the camera to save bandwidth. And if you have a question regarding the presentation, you can type them in the chat, and I will then take them up. And you could also raise your hand if you want to make a contribution to the discussion we will have afterwards. So best way is to use the chat, and when you indicate that you want to have the word, then you will be unmuted and you can raise the question or give us some input. So with this, I would then like to hand over to Arian, who will give us a detailed view on what we plan with the manufacturing data spaces. And here we have the results of the poll. So the majority is from different associations, so which is good, because they're also very important for us. And we also have machine tool providers and machine tool users, but also service providers. Yeah, that's very interesting. And now I will start the presentation from Arian and hand over to Arian. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias. So I would like to give you a quick overview of what we are doing in this area. Kilian, which is my head of unit, already gave you an introduction on the policy objectives of the European Commission with respect to the data spaces. So I will now go a little bit more detail of all the activities that we are doing there. And obviously, I will focus on what we want to achieve with the manufacturing data spaces. I will give you a little bit an overview of our current thinking, and also some outlook of where we could go to. But where we could go to, that very much depends on this discussion. It very much depends upon other discussions that we are having too. We are still thinking about it. Nothing has been determined yet. We have certain ideas that we would like to validate with you. So we therefore also hope to get some inputs from you during the discussion. Now, we would like to start with our commissioner, Mr. Thierry Breton, and some of his statements that he has made. He puts a lot of emphasis on industrial data. For him, data is the lifeblood of economic development. It's the basis for many new products and services. It drives productivity, it drives resource efficiency, and it is the way to get towards more personalized products and services. Also, Philippe Geerts, in his introduction just a few minutes ago, mentioned that the machining sector is increasingly data-driven. So we see the importance of data increasing more and more, and it is very well recognized on the policy level, as for instance is stated here by Mr. Witton. It also can lead to artificial intelligence type of applications using the data that has been collected and has been shared by industry. If we go to the next slide. So this is a quick introduction of how data is currently being shared in industry. This is from a study that we did 2 years ago, and I realize that there are some boxes here and there, so you can't see everything perhaps. But this was a study among 129 organizations, where we asked how much data do you share and how much data from other organizations do you use. So when it comes to data sharing, 61% of those surveyed companies do not share their data. They keep their data to themselves. 39% do share their data with other organizations. And from those 39%, 52% face obstacles in sharing their data. If we go to the next slide, you can see the obstacles that these companies face. So the main barrier is technical. So technical obstacles and related costs for that. And here you have to think about interoperability in trying to get the data together and making it available for other organizations. So technical aspects are the main obstacle, but you also see legal aspects. And especially when it comes to data ownership, there is some uncertainty to what these rights are. So these legal obstacles would be the second category. And then you see some others as well, such as, for instance, there's a difficulty to track down and have control on the usage of shared data, but also skills. So the skills of the data workers, there is a lack of skills in that. So these are other aspects as well. Here in this picture, you see the whole set with a link to the study in case you would like to know more. So this is data sharing, making data available. In the next slide, Matthias, yes, thank you. Here you see to what extent data is actually being reused. With reuse, we mean the use of data that is made available by other organizations. 58% of those companies surveyed do not reuse data, 42% do, and from those 42%, 59% again face obstacles when they want to reuse those data. We go to the next slide. So what are these obstacles in data reuse? Well, typically it is access denial. In other words, companies that want to use other organizations' data do not have access or are denied access to those data. And obviously, in many cases, this is for very legitimate reasons, simply because data owned by other organizations may not be available because those data owners do not want them to be available. Could also be related to, for instance, protection of private individuals, and that data is therefore not made available and access is denied. Another obstacle would be the terms and conditions for accessing data. That could be quite unfair, or at least perceived as unfair. For instance, via high prices to access the data. So obviously there's also a kind of a difference in, let's say, claims to be made. So if you want to access data, it could come against a high cost, and therefore it stops companies from trying to access other organizations' data. Also here, interoperability is another key problem that we often see. So data could come in formats that is not easily integrated into the systems of a company who wants to reuse those data. If we go to the next slide. So given this background, the Commission came with the data strategy, as already mentioned by Kilian, where we try to do something against this lack of data sharing and data, therefore also the lack of data reuse. Now, what can be done? So here you see a number of areas. This is the background of what we want to address. So a large part of data in the future will come from industrial and professional applications, but also from areas of public interest. And many data will be provided by Internet of Things type of applications. So what we see at this moment, or actually a few years ago, was that data was largely processed in the cloud. 80% of the processing of data took place in the cloud, and only 20% of data was processed in IoT devices. This ratio is going to change in the next years. By 2025, more data will be processed on the edge, meaning in IoT devices, and perhaps only 20% will be processed in the cloud. In other words, the ratio that you saw before, the 20-80 ratio, is now transfers into an 80-20 ratio, and data processing will really move away from a central position in cloud, in data centers, to more closer to the edge, where the actual data collection takes place, and where actually also some intelligence can be brought in to act upon the data and to process the data. Now, in Europe, we have a few strong points, such as a strong legal framework, for instance, in terms of data protection. Here you can also think about fundamental rights, cybersecurity laws, and so on. And obviously, there's the internal market with all kinds of companies and organizations involved. So with this single market for data, the European Union wants to reinforce its data sovereignty as well. We go to the next slide. What does the European data strategy comprise? So these are the main goals that you see here. We want data to flow freely within the EU and across different sectors. We want to have high quality data available for other organizations to use, to create and to innovate. This could be, for instance, high value public sector information. This can also be B2B data sharing. Obviously, we want to have European rules and values fully respected, which means, for instance, that data ownership, or actually the right to determine data access, is key. Also, it will not be forced. In other words, it will always be upon voluntary data sharing between organizations. And we need to have clear rules for access and use of data that are fair, practical, and clear. And as Kilian already mentioned, we are working towards a legislative act on governance mechanisms, but the principle of voluntary data sharing will always be key here. If we go to the next slide. Now, just don't want to go in detail here. This is a kind of repetition almost of what we said before about the problems that we see. Basically not enough data available for reuse, so companies do not make enough data available. But there are some other issues as well that you see highlighted here. If you go to the data strategy, you see these issues mentioned, not so much the issues that I talked about before from the study that we had 2 years ago, but they kind of come down to the same arguments here. If you go to the next slide. Now, this is the 4 pillars of the data strategy, the 4 ways where we would like to act upon increasing the amount of data made available and increasing the reuse of data throughout organizations and throughout the market. So as a first part, we would like to put in place a legislative framework for the governance of common European data spaces. So here you should think about governance structures that support decisions on what data can be used in which situations, that facilitate cross-border data use, that prioritize interoperability requirements and standards within and across sectors. As mentioned before, this will be made available towards the end of this year, and I all encourage you to have a look into that. Then the second pillar would be enablers. And enablers here you can think about infrastructures, data sharing tools, architectures, governance mechanisms that are needed for data sharing, but that are also needed to create, for instance, artificial intelligence ecosystems afterwards. Here we are looking into a European Federation of Cloud Infrastructures This could be via the form of a high impact project or an important project of common European interest. And investment here will be relatively big, with the current amount that we have in mind is between 4 to 6 billion euros for that. It's the third point. That's the skills part, and this is always with technology development and research and innovation in technologies. You can put the most brilliant technologies available, but if you don't have the people to use it, it's basically not very sensible. So you also need to develop on digital skills for the workers to use these new technologies. And that's where the competence come in. Investments in skills, investments in general data literacy as well. And the fourth point, this is the topic for today, the rollout of common European data spaces. So we want to establish EU-wide, common, interoperable data spaces in key strategic economic sectors. Manufacturing obviously is one of those key economic sectors, but also not only in the private sector, but also in domains of public interest, such as e-health, for instance, in health type of applications. If we go to the next slide. Now, this is a very schematic overview of the common European data spaces. In the middle, you see the 9 sectors that we currently have in mind, ranging from health towards skills. So the second one, industrial and manufacturing, this is the topic for today. But there are others like agriculture, like energy, public administration that we are working on already right now. Not all of them will be targeted in the first years. Some will come a bit later, but the manufacturing one, but also the agriculture one and the health one, just to give you an examples, those will be addressed in the first year. And I will say a few more words about that later on. Now, at the bottom, basically, those are the components of a data space. So you need technical tools for data pooling and sharing. You need to have standards in order to understand the data that is being shared, so that everybody has the same common understanding when you share data. An order, just to mention one type of data, is then interpreted by both the data collector and the data receiver, if you like. Also, governance needs to be in place. Contracts, licenses, access rights. You need to think about this. Who has access to data? Under what conditions do they have access to data? What do they need to do once they have used the data? Can they keep it forever, or do they need to delete it, for instance? And all this needs to be supported by appropriate IT capacity. Cloud is one example, but as we said before, things are moving towards the edge. So also this development needs to be supported. On the left, those are a number of, let's say, circumstantial factors. For instance, a rich pool of data. Here you can think about data sets of high public value. Free flow of data. I mean, you want to have data crossing countries. The border of a country is not an obstacle for data flowing, but also between different sectors. GDPR is there, it's here to stay, and obviously all we do needs to fully respect the GDPR legislation. Also, this horizontal framework for data governance and data access I mentioned before, it will come towards the end of the year, and this is let's say, an important factor from the environment to take into account. If we go to the next, yes. Now, how will this be implemented? And that will be done via the Digital Europe program. This is a new program that we would like to start as of 2021, where we aim to build digital capacities. So this is really a capacity building program. It's also meant for large-scale deployment of digital technologies. On the left, I give you a number of reasons why we want to do this. We'll not go in detail, but just for instance, for the first one, competing globally is an important factor. Just one example is artificial intelligence. If you look at what other regions in the world spend on artificial intelligence, it's massive. The US, China, they spend more than 10 billion euros annually on artificial intelligence alone. So Europe needs to invest in these kind of key future technologies as well. That's why on the right, where you see the 5 main components of the Digital Europe program, artificial intelligence is one of them. High performance computing is another one. Cybersecurity is another one. Those are the 3 key components where Digital Europe program will invest in building capacities. This is complemented by a 4th element on digital skills and a 5th one where we talk about the digital transformation and we want to address interoperability. The work on the data spaces will be in the artificial intelligence part. If you go to the next slide. Now, again, I don't want to go in detail, but this is just to position this Digital Europe program and its aims and objectives as compared to some other programs. For instance, many people know the current Horizon 2020 research program. They do not know yet our Digital Europe program. So the future of the Horizon 2020 program as of 2021 will be Horizon Europe. This is more or less a straight continuation of the Horizon 2020 research and innovation program. And there the focus is on that, research and innovation. We are developing new technologies via research and innovation. Digital Europe is not about research and innovation. Digital Europe will be about strategic capacities, building up these strategic capacities, and large-scale deployment of technologies. So these are totally different objectives, and there will be no research and innovation in Digital Europe. It's important to keep that into mind. For future, let's say, information sessions just like this one, we will come back to this more and more to explain more and more what it really means to build up these strategic capacities and to come towards large-scale deployment. So in the for data spaces, it is a matter of building up capacities as well. If you go to the next slide. This is just very schematic of just to give you a sense of what is in the Digital Europe program for the first years. And I will just go very briefly through this. For instance, high performance computing. Here you have to think about the purchase of exascale machines, upgrading existing supercomputers, investments in quantum computing, that kind of activities. For artificial intelligence, there is the part on the data spaces. So I will go in more detail on that later on. But also related to that is the Cloud Federation. Many of you probably know the Gaia X program in Germany and France. So that kind of development, federation of cloud infrastructure, making up the rules for interoperability and governance of different clouds. That is part of the work here as well. Second component under artificial intelligence would be the testing and experimentation facilities. That means testing and experimentation of artificial intelligence tools, artificial intelligence algorithms, and so on. These need to be tested and validated in real life or near real life circumstances and in different sectors. So we want to set up these testing and experimentation facilities for AI tools and algorithms in sectors such as health, mobility, manufacturing, but also dedicated to edge. As I said before, processing will shift from the cloud to the edge. And as a third component, there is the European AI platform. This will be scaled up. So this is a kind of repository where people can find the latest tools, the latest algorithms, the latest data sets as well to build their own tools and algorithms, etc. And this is currently under development under Horizon 2020 project. It will be brought towards the Digital Europe program, and all these resources will be made available for everybody to use. Cybersecurity, there will be a network of competence centers on cybersecurity that is going to be set up. Here you also have to think about the cooperation between different member states on different directives, certification issues, are products compliant with cybersecurity legislation, things like that. Skills, skills and education is actually more a member states competence. So the European Union is not doing that much. The member states would like to keep that for themselves. But we do have some programs, for instance, when it comes to traineeships in certain areas or short-term trainings in advanced technologies. And fifth, this is also a major component towards deployments. And here the European Digital Innovation Hubs are key. These are also under the responsibility of our unit. So Kilian is also responsible for that. And we want to go towards deployment of these European Digital Innovation Hubs towards where the locations of SMEs and public sectors. Typically, this is on a regional basis. So the goal is to set up more than 200 of these European Digital Innovation Hubs throughout Europe, close to where SMEs are, close to where the public sector is. And these would be one-stop shops for SMEs, for the public sector, to for all kinds of questions related to their digital transformation. So let's go to the next slide. Manufacturing data spaces. So what do we want to achieve? We would like to set up these manufacturing data spaces that should lead to availability of large pools of data in the manufacturing sector, combined with technical tools and infrastructures that are needed to use and exchange data and to make data available. And all of that combined with appropriate governance mechanisms. So mechanisms that determine who has access to data, who has access to the set of organizations that share data, and so on. So focus will be on sharing, pooling, and reusing data across organizations. And I need to emphasize this. We're talking about sharing data between different organizations, B2B data sharing. It's not within an organization. This is a challenge in itself in many organizations, and being part of a bureaucracy, we can certainly talk about that. But this is really about B2B data sharing between different manufacturing sector companies. But it could also be between, for instance, a machine tool user and a machine tool provider. And this is what we have in mind here. So we would like to set up a number of these operational data spaces for specific parts in the manufacturing sector where different type of companies come together. And here, all of this, and I need to stress that again, is based upon voluntary agreements. So we don't want to, and we don't even have the possibilities to force companies to share data. All of that should be upon voluntary agreements. Go to the next slide. Now, this is just an example. This is an example that came to us via Brainport Industries in Eindhoven, where they coordinate what they call the Smart Connected Supplier Network. It's a set of companies around ASML. ASML is a big wafer stepper producer in a place very close to Eindhoven in the southeast of the Netherlands. ASML is not doing everything themselves. They use many suppliers, and these suppliers use many suppliers again. On the map on the left, you see all the companies that provide parts for these wafer steppers to ASML. And the size of the circle indicates the value and the revenues and the money streams, if you like, of these companies that are involved. So it's not one company and perhaps a few suppliers. No, you talk about over 200 type of suppliers that are involved in here. So it's a huge network, if you like. So they realized the issue as well. If they want to produce these wafer steppers, they need input from many different companies, and data needs to be shared between all these companies. And this can be data sharing in terms of, let's say, orders, production status, inventory levels, and so on. So the focus here is more on supply chain management type of data. To accomplish all that, they clearly saw the need for one common language for data exchange. So they defined, what does it mean an order? What does it mean a forecast? What does it mean a bill of materials? What does it mean an invoice? Logistical information, measurement data. For all that kind of let's say, different data were defined and standardized within this set of clusters, this clusters of organizations that you see on the map. Go to the next slide. So how would this work? So they define this common language for sharing data across the supply chain. And manufacturing companies typically have ERP systems that are provided by service providers. So what you see is that these service providers agreed on this common language because the users, the manufacturing companies, wanted them to agree. This was all facilitated by Brainport Industries. And once agreed on this common language, data sharing can take place between these different manufacturing companies, facilitated by the service providers. Service providers, that's typically the ERP companies, but it could also be more independent organizations as well. As a result, you get an open community that is driven by these manufacturing companies, where IT service providers are involved, where sector organizations are involved, where knowledge institutes such as TNO play a neutral brokering role. It all seems to work quite well. They're growing quite fast, from around 200 organizations currently working together towards more than 500 in the next years. And again, this is all based upon voluntary data sharing. A company decides itself what data it wants to share. It only needs to adhere to the common language, but it decides with whom and what it wants to share. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you see some of the names that are involved. So at this moment, approximately 10 service providers, but over 200 manufacturing companies, growing to, well, I mentioned 500, but apparently the objectives are more objectives, so 2,000 plus in the coming years. So some of the names are probably known to you. Some of them are more local organizations that you may not have heard of. We go to the next slide. Now, this is not the first webinar we organized. We had another one in the beginning of May, where we invited a large audience to kind of scope the whole issue. And one question we asked is the first one that you see on the bullet here. Should we focus on data sharing or should we focus on data reuse? Well, majority says focus on data sharing. In other words, on making the data available. Not so much on what you do with other people's or other organizations' data. Focus on the data sharing. Then the next point, what kind of data to focus on? I mean, manufacturing is incredibly wide. So we wanted to know if we should focus on, for instance, design type of data, logistics data, maintenance data, engineering data, shop floor data, supply chain data, and so on. And there were two clear preferences. One is for sharing maintenance type of data, and the other one is for supply chain planning data. The previous example of the SCSN, the Smart Connected Supplier Network, is actually an example of supply chain planning. For this webinar, obviously we want to focus more on the maintenance part, on maintenance data and how maintenance type of data is shared between organizations and probably typically between users and providers of machines, of tools, and so on. We also asked other questions back then related to implementation, but let's not go there at the moment. So this sets a bit the setting. Via this first webinar 2 months ago, or almost 3 months ago, we decided for the moment to focus on maintenance and on supply chain planning. Yes, this is a bit a part of an open discussion related to the starting point. You can basically start from two perspectives when you want to set up these manufacturing data spaces. You can start from scratch. You can have certain building blocks or common software components and try to assemble these common building blocks together. Building blocks could be the examples mentioned here: connectors, protocol translators, and so on. Some of them may be available as building block already. So you can simply download them, typically that's open source software, and start putting them together so that data can be shared. This is probably a lengthy process. So another way to start this whole thing is to start from an existing situation where people are already sharing data, where different companies are already sharing data. This can be very small, can be what we call embryonic. We would call it an embryonic data space, where certain organizations decided that it is in their interest to share data among themselves. And then the objectives would be to complete that, meaning making sure that all organizations are able to share all kind of data, to deepen it, other type of data, to expand the organizations involved, and so on. So then you don't focus on putting together these common building blocks, but instead you might actually extract from the work that is going on in this embryonic data space. You might be able to extract some common building blocks based upon the work done. Looking also again at the example of the smart connected supplier network, we believe that at this moment it makes more sense to start from an existing embryonic data space and invest in expanding it, in deepening it, so that it gains traction and that this capacity that is being built that way is made available to a larger set of organizations. But this is actually something we could discuss, whether you would agree on this view. It's a choice we need to make, and therefore we would like to get your input on this. If you go to the next slide. So at this moment, we are writing what is called the work program for 2021-2022. And in this work program, we basically state how we want to invest the money related to manufacturing data spaces. As I mentioned before, when it comes to activities, we will focus on supply chain management, predictive maintenance, and a third one that I will say a few words about it later on. So when it comes to supply chain management, you have to think about continuously monitoring and exchanging status data on purchase orders, sales orders, demand forecasts, raw materials, and so on. Applications would include resilient supply chain planning and intelligent demand forecasting. End users would be different tiers in a supply chain. So for suppliers, OEMs, customers, and so on. When we talk about predictive maintenance, this would include exchanging data on, for instance, machine status, breakdowns, service orders, etc. End users here, meaning the organizations that share data, could be machine users, machine vendors, but also maintenance service providers, and so on. Now, for the third one, the recycling and remanufacturing, there is a lot of interest created by the Green Deal. So we are focusing more on, let's say, sustainable activities, and recycling and remanufacturing would be part of that. Here, we don't really think we should already go towards deployment of a data space, but this would be more a preparatory action to prepare for next steps in the future. When we talk about the sectors, we can think about a number of sectors. When it comes to supply chain management, one option would be to focus on high value, low volume manufacturing. In other words, very dedicated and individualized products. On the other hand, you can also think about low value and high volume production, so much more mass production type of manufacturing. In the first case, you would involve much more bill of material type of data, engineering data that would customize the product. And in the second, these would play a much smaller role. So for predictive maintenance type of data, we have in mind the machine tool sector. That's why we have this webinar together with CECIMO today. But this is not decided yet. We need to see if we can find good examples. and then indeed we would need to make a decision on which sector exactly to focus on, or which subsector exactly to focus on. So if you go to the next slide, Matthias. I think there should be one more. Okay. So anyway, this is, I just wanted to mention a few questions based upon the presentation I just gave. So
the question I reserved for the discussion, sorry, shall I show it?
No, we can do it then. Let's do it then. So let me then conclude here. Thank you very much for the attention. Looking forward to the discussion. So back to you, Matthias.
Sometimes a bit difficult to unmute. Okay, back again. So thanks a lot, Arjan. As I said, we will have the discussion on the scope after the two next presentations. But as I said in the beginning, there will be also the possibility to ask directly comprehension questions if you have some to Arjan now. But as the discussion on the scope and what was how we want to develop these manufacturing data spaces, this we will have after the next two example data spaces. So Damir, do you think we have any comprehensive questions that we shall discuss now? No, there's one question, maybe Ariana, on what about construction? Maybe you take this quick and then we will go further on.
Okay, thank you for the question. In the slide with the data spaces, the 9 different data spaces, these were the ones from the data strategy from February. So these have been selected already. This does not mean that we will not focus on other type of sectors. The construction sector is indeed in discussion with us. It's also one of the 14 industrial ecosystems that our commissioner would like to focus on. We are indeed talking to them in this area, for this area, meaning for going towards the setup and deployment of data spaces for the construction sector. I'm not sure yet, but this depends a bit also on ongoing discussions, whether we can already ask for that in the beginning, meaning in 21, 22. Probably there is still some research needed first, so we intend to put some topics in the first 2 years for Horizon Europe to investigate data sharing tools and infrastructures for the construction sector in the first 2 years of Horizon Europe. But then after that, so we talk about 23, 24, we could think about deployment. We could think about the capacity building via the Digital Europe program on data spaces in the construction sector. Matthias?
Okay, yes, thank you. Then we will go further on with 2 example data spaces that will be presented by Luigi Anquin from Micron Group and Tommy Kankainen from FastM Digital. And I'm now stopping the screen sharing and will hand over to Luigi. Luigi, please take the floor.
Yes, thank you. And good morning to everybody. And thanks for attending to this webinar. I start the sharing of my presentation. Okay, hope that you see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see it. Yeah, now it's perfect.
So, yes, I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Micron Group, which actually is a Swiss-based company. We have here actually probably an European platform, but for us it's really interesting to participate to this webinar with CECIMO and of course also to hear from European Commission's the developments on the data spaces. Because even if you are a Swiss-based company, actually we are exporting about 80–90% of our products around the world, especially also in Europe. and data sharing, artificial intelligence, IoT, it's clearly that is on our table also. I just give you a short presentation of what Micron Group do. Is actually a small, medium-sized company. We are about 1,100 employees around the world. We are split in two main segments. The one segment actually is the Micron machining, which is a machine tool manufacturer and supplier, where actually the main segments are the automotive, watches, and there is connectors and writing instruments technology behind and customers. And within the Micron machining, we have the Micron tool, which provide and supply high cutting tools to be implemented in our equipments, but also to third-party customers. Then we have another segment, which is the Micron automation, and there they manufacture and supply customized assembly systems, in particular from pharmaceutical. But both actually segments produce and as final products machine systems, assembly systems. So our machine systems are clearly equipped with standard and customized software, robot interconnections, and of course, it's really interesting to arrive to a full interconnections when the machine and the equipment is at customer side. The data sharing so becomes more complex. I will provide you maybe then the examples later and what actually our goals, and on the other side even our clearly risk and challenge. So Micron, as I mentioned to you before, was born in Switzerland more than 100 years ago. Then Micron acquires Micron Boudry, where is the automation segments mainly, is actually listed at the Swiss Stock Exchange. Then I've acquired and developed it in the United States, also in Denver, where actually we have still today a site with more than 150 employees there. And then we also enlarge our sites in Singapore, then in Shanghai, and in Denver we exactly create a new facility to enlarge the developments. And then we achieved more or less 200 millions of order intake. So as you can see, we are not so big company. About the topics of today and what we would like to highlight is what are actually our goals towards the Industry 4.0, so artificial intelligence. And in particularly, what I would like to highlight here, that already more than 10 years ago, we started with VPN connections, and I'm not actually maybe a technician's guy, but I work from about more than 12 years in the industry, and I can say that we started VPN connections with customers and machine at sites. Here, the main topics is today is to arrive and to have a full predictive maintenance, so a full interconnections with our machines and equipments at customer side. But this clearly, as the presentations before from Arian was really interesting, and it's very good also to hear that there are developments here from institutions. And the main risk and the main challenges are from a technical point of view today and from legal perspective. So for these reasons that also I really participate in these groups, and for us it's really important because we have main issues exactly with the data sharing. Not always we have customer approaches or willingness to provide and split and share the data, because behind, even if it's on a voluntary basis, you create some terms and conditions, and that also is one of our goals and today key topics to arrive to create really terms and conditions which are in equitable and fair way between all the stakeholders. So it means between service providers, between customers, between sub-suppliers. What we arrive today in our connections between our machines and the machine at customer site is even to create the segregations of data that the sub-suppliers can collect from the final customer. So it means that if our equipment is equipped with a robot or other kind of components, the sub-suppliers will see only data related to its own components and not all the data that can arrive from the customers. But yes, there are different topics that we are addressing even to reduce the risk and to show sometimes also to the customer what to implement. And here actually I would like to show a bit what we are doing as mitigating the risk and what actually we have as ethics and compliance model within Microns to lead and to work in this new era of digitalizations. And the first topics actually is to have really KPIs and Micron values, to have a full code of conduct, which actually is to strengthen the partnership with the supply chain, the code of conduct, but also to be actually in line with the principles that also our customer has. And a full acceptable use policy, and we will see later how much is important to have a completely commitment and full awareness from our employees to be very compliant with an anti-corruption and anti-bribery policies, to be very careful to the cybersecurity. And this actually is very challenging because even in the latest times, we had several tentatives of attacks, threats in the cybersecurity. So you have always to develop and to be careful about these from your own organizations and with the third parties with who you collaborate. A full data privacy policies, so from third parties and to employees also, so a full respect of the GDPR provisions and statement and full compliance with the local policies. And within that, we follow a continuous risk assessment, trainings, awareness, monitoring, and then reporting. Cybersecurity for us is, as I mentioned before, is actually, and IT security is one of the 4 topics that I'm addressing today. The first one, as I say to you, is actually to drive and to arrive to the full interconnection of our machines when are at customer site, to have an efficiency and the full support also for customers. And this is the first point. The second point is a full IT security. And for us, the success factors is actually to go towards the emerging technologies, so artificial intelligence, IoT, eventually blockchain, cloud services, as we mentioned before, and hedge, and etc. But actually, yeah, we need a robust management and cybersecurity risk plan mitigations. Then second is important for us to establish policies and where actually with small but clear rules where employees, they know and they have a full, completely cultural awareness. So we do trainings to all the staff because we believe that of course the attacks can come from third parties, but actually with the full cultural awareness to the employees, we can reduce the risk here. We do an activity monitorings, again, with employees, partners to reduce also risk and to try to have a full malware detections. what happened recently from an attack from the United States, and that was actually driven to attack directly our server. Then we mentioned even before, I heard in the presentations, that is really important to create a good partnership with within the supply chains and the third parties. And so here again, even in data sharing and in cyber risk, is important here to have a full commitment with your suppliers and to be on equitable solutions and equitable positions with the third parties. And make good collaborations. And here it's, I think, important, the legal aspects where terms and conditions are set up on an equitable basis between third parties. So it means with customers, with sub-suppliers, and also with service providers. From a manufacturer of machines tool, the main fear today in the data sharing actually is the trust and the full trust of the big service providers. Especially we know that probably they provide grants in their terms and conditions, but they also often include big limitation of liabilities. So when the data are on the cloud, we actually don't know exactly what may happen then later. And as I mentioned to you before, even customers, they have fear and they do not really want to provide a full data, which might enable better and efficiency in maintenance and in data exchange to have a really predictive maintenance then later. And it's clearly then when you have full data, you know probably the volume of productions and you know actually exactly how is the positions of the customers in his field and in his segments. Then what we do also...
Luch, may I remind you of the time that you can
yes,
come
yes,
to a conclusion
of course.
next
I have just
2 to 3 minutes?
later.
Okay, perfect.
And okay, also cyber liability insurance is very important. So this actually is our public approach for the 4.0 industries, and then actually is to arrive to a really full really full interconnections between our machines, our equipments, and when our customer side. So really standard predictive, probably on SAP Edge. We don't know actually if SAP will be then the final service provider or probably another one. A data sharing with Micron, so a full IoT platform and backend integrations and full collaborative process optimizations. And here I have again another examples of what could be the interconnections between Micron remote assistance and the final customer's data. And so it's basically based on VPN connections with certificates, with SAP Edge at the end, SAP Clouds. And but again, the background here for us actually is to establish really good terms and conditions. And I believe that regulatory here, as I heard this morning, and the full commitment between different stakeholders, between the parties, can establish a really equitable and fairness relationship between the parties. So thank you for your attentions, and I'm available in case of any queries.
Okay, thank you, Luigi. In the chat, I don't see direct questions regarding your presentation, so we will go further on with the next example data space. And here we have Tommi Kankainen from Fastens Digital. May I ask you, Tommi, to start?
Yes, I will. Thank you. And thank you for the previous presentations. Extremely interesting. Can you see my screen?
Not now, maybe it takes some seconds.
Let's see.
No.
No, okay. Should be shared, but I'll try to do it again.
Now
right.
it's yes.
Now it works. Great.
Yes.
Good.
Great.
All right. So I will give a few examples of the data spaces we are involved in at Fastums. And well, my name is Tomi Kankainen. I'm the Chief Digital Officer and Vice President of the MOM software business at Fastums. I'll start by giving a short introduction to Fastums as a company. So we are a well, leading supplier for flexible factory automation and also the manufacturing operations management software at the moment. And what's important is that we are an independent and open system integrator for all machine tool brands. So we're not dependent on any machine tool or robot or whatever brands. We are completely open. We're also a family-owned company and belonging to a group of companies that's the turnover, yearly turnover is actually almost 2 billion euros yearly. So as a company, we have been founded, or well, the parent company has been founded already 1901, but Fastums delivered its first system already on 82 and it's still running. The same system is still running. And since 82, we've been delivering more than 4,000 systems globally. We have 24/7 technical support to all systems, so we have the capability to have a remote connection to every system that's out there. And naturally, that requires the global network of sales and service locations, naturally. So we're making a little bit more than 100 million with a little bit more than 500 employees at the moment. And shortly, what it means to be an open integrator, of course, is that the core is that we are improving our customers' productivity and profitability by doing these three things. So first of all, automating the production machinery. So that means mainly the machine tools, but also auxiliary processes like, for example, deburring. That's a typical thing to be automated. The second thing, actually, that's becoming more and more important, and is very much related to data spaces, is the integration of production data systems, and not only production, but let's say integration of enterprise data systems that actually enable the high level of automation and manufacturing operations management, actually. And then the actual planning and execution of the production of the automated and also non-automated production through the software, through the MOM software. So that's really quickly what we do as a company. And next, well, like I said, since we are an advanced flexible automation provider and manufacturing operations management software provider, an open integrator that's supposed to work with all brands, all machine tool brands, with all kind of software infrastructures and so forth. We're in a central role, and we are looking at this context from exactly in between. So of course, naturally related to this offering, we have really pretty advanced lifecycle and maintenance services, and for that reason, we are a member of several ecosystems and initiatives related to data spaces, and that's the topic today was the maintenance. Naturally, we have activities related to maintenance on these initiatives, but naturally, because we are providing software and automation, those are the other topics that we are interested in. So we have conducted several pilots and other activities within these initiatives, like, for example, utilizing machine learning and AI for predictive and prescriptive maintenance, which is actually pretty interesting. we've been experimenting with XR technologies for remote supported maintenance, which is actually, of course, at the moment, given the pandemic situation, extremely important to be able to give more and more profound and advanced remote capabilities for our customers. So I will give a short summary of the ecosystems and the data spaces we are involved in, and then give a short conclusion of the pretty practical findings that we are let's say wrestling with. So pretty important data space, of course, in the EU is the International Data Spaces Association, IDSA, and that's one of the key players in Europe. We are one of the 3 members from Finland already since 2017, and actually we are still the only industrial company from Finland that's a member of IDSA. That's one of the challenges, actually. But still, we've been working in close cooperation with the other Finnish members, which are the VTT, Technical Research Center of Finland, which is also the hub in Finland, and DIMEC, Digital Internet Materials and Engineering Co-Creation Limited. And these are the 2 other members. We've been mainly working on the working group of for use cases and requirements so far. What's also interesting, actually, of course, related to European data strategy is the Gaia-X initiative, which naturally will play an important role in the data strategy implementation, and there is a link to IDSA, which will be or is a founding member of the one of the founding members of the Gaia-X Foundation, and then, because that's still a pretty new initiative, we are still like following up the development and investigating how to get involved in the Gaia-X. Naturally, that will be an important player there. And as for the IDS, of course, the CSN network that was already mentioned is an important activity that's taking place already related to the capabilities of open data sharing within the ecosystems. From the national side, we are a member of the II, Intelligent Industry, which is a Finnish ecosystem. So consisting of leading Finnish industrial companies, and they're pretty similar goal is to be able to enable networked, information-driven, autonomous value systems that adapt to the changing environment and user needs. Well, to be more agile, and of course beneath that lies the capability to share data. So the INDEX program, Industrial Data Excellence, is an intelligent industry ecosystem program where we are also active member, and here the index is focusing on data sharing in manufacturing networks between multiple partners, and here the goal is to be able to create a common data space for industry in Finland. Now, of course, this is national, but naturally it has to be connected to European-wide and global data spaces in the future. So one of the things that is taking place in Index is that we are looking into applying the IDS reference architecture, maybe the SES network architecture into the common data space. Business models naturally are an important factor, how to create actual money in data intensive solutions, connectivity, smart factory connectivity, the AI in relation to manufacturing process excellence. So this is very much related to what we are doing in our manufacturing operations management software. But then prescriptive maintenance is actually a pretty interesting thing. So that would be the next step after predictive maintenance. So applying AI into the maintenance activities based on the vast amount of data and being able to create, let's say, recommendations of the maintenance activities already proactively. But I need to say that we are on a pretty early steps here, but to be able to create the prescriptive maintenance activities, of course, you need to be able to share data in between different actors in the networks. So going to the summary. So of course, like I said, the vast amount of industrial data that's already generated. It's in theory gives really endless possibilities related to maintenance and for being able to create prescriptive maintenance, especially ultimately. But there are actually quite a lot of obstacles which are kind of almost irritating or pretty wicked problems. So how to make the data available in practice? Of course, there's the trust question inside ecosystems. How to share data? That's a big question. There's no answer to that one, but in practice. So for example, how to easily and sustainably integrate various different enterprise software systems, even within a single company, is actually a pretty big challenge, even today, because we are struggling in practice with this kind of maybe it sounds a simple problem, but it's not in practice. So, and then not to mention the ecosystem level enterprise software system integration. That's a huge challenge even before we can go further. And then the second practical question is how to reliably and easily gather data from legacy machines and other legacy resources, let's say the older machines, because in practice, of course, you know, in machining workshops, there are lots of older machines with no connectivity, with no way to get data out of the machines in a reasonable way. So that's in practice quite a big question, and for us as an open integrator, we need to be able to deal with all kinds of machine tools, all kinds of resources, all kinds of enterprise software systems, data sources, and so forth. So there was actually in the previous presentation the prediction of that in year 2025, 80% of the data is actually processed in IoT devices instead in the cloud instead of in the cloud. So actually that creates even more data to be integrated on the factory floor level to be able to generate information for example, prescriptive maintenance purposes. So it's not going away. So other challenges, one thing that we have faced is that this kind of large initiatives like IDSA or Gaia-X are producing results quite slowly, in fact, and especially for smaller companies, that's a problem. And then of course there are smaller initiatives, especially there are many startups or scale-ups that are working with similar kind of ideologies of applying technologies like cryptography for data sharing. They move quicker, but they're not that transparent either, and it's also very difficult to get into these kind of ecosystems as a manufacturing company, because based on my experience, for an average manufacturing company, talking about data sharing based on cryptographical security systems, or talking about IDSA, applying IDSA or CSN to the manufacturing networks sounds quite alien. It's not easy to get a grip of these concepts and get involved and get the benefits out of these. So actually the in a previous presentation, the idea of creating this kind of embryonic data spaces. So as I understood it meant that starting from the small actually sounds really good, because we need to find ways how to get the companies involved actually and build on top of these great ideas actually that there are building up in these initiatives where we are also participating. Of course, related to Gaia-X initiative, that's a big idea and very important for you, but I don't know, is able to deliver the benefits and the sovereignty that's actually asked for in relation to the international rivals, like for example Amazon Cloud Services or other similar type of services in practice. Because, like I said, these kind of large initiatives are kind of moving pretty slowly and not necessarily are capable of producing results that are implementable for smaller companies especially. So then that's one of the challenges. All right. Thank you very much. That was my presentation. I think I was keeping it inside the 15-minute limit.
Perfect. Thank you, Tommy. Also, thanks again, Luigi. And these were good examples showing what's already happening. And we now will start with our discussion on what we've heard, discussion especially on the conceptual ideas we have presented, Arjen has presented. And we have also heard from Tommy, for example, that there are big initiatives, but they are sometimes slowly, maybe too slow, and they also look some kind alien, as he puts it, to especially smaller companies. Therefore, we would like to discuss with you what can be good starting points for these data spaces in manufacturing. And the discussion will be that way that the panelists can intervene directly. But if you want to share an idea as a participant, you have to first indicate this via the chat. So here is the slide Arjen want to use in his presentation. I snitched it for the discussion, and these are the questions that we want to discuss with you. So first, what data to share? I've learned new things. It's not only about predictive, it's about prescriptive maintenance. So, whoop. Screen sharing has stopped. Share again, sorry. Is there already someone who wants to give us an input on his experience? What data could be a good starting point for such data spaces which are cross companies? We are not talking about a company using cloud technology or a direct exchange between a machine tool provider and a machine tool user, but data sharing with others, maybe even competitors, but with others within your sectors. For what kind of data do you think there will be, this will be beneficial, not only in the terms that you increase the amount of data that's available for machine learning, but also to have possibilities to develop new business models and possibilities to optimize processes and so on. So are there any ideas on what data could be most beneficial to share? I'm now looking at the chat, and as I said, the panelists can come in at any time they wish. So it's very quiet. Maybe Arjen, as you wanted to have this slide as part of your presentation, maybe you will start with the examples that you have mentioned here, data on machine status, breakdown, service orders, etc. Is this just from some studies, or is this a result of the discussion you had with different machine tool providers? So.
Yeah, Matthias, thank you. So this actually is, I wouldn't say it's the result of study, and I would not say it's the result of discussions. This is more or less what we came up with behind our desk in our big ivory tower, if you like. So that's why we would like to put it here for discussion and see to what extent this is realistic. It may be Luigi and maybe Tommy from their practical industrial experience could comment on that.
Yeah, I can take a bit the wordings as I mentioned before in my presentation. For us, actually, it's really important to have a full data. Now, maybe I'm not really the expert here, the technician's guy, but of course, it's to know exactly how much is the running of the machines, the volumes of productions, probably even the connections with certain components, certain units on the machine, for example, spindles, how much they are running, how much is the pressure on the spindles, how much. So that it's really each part of the machine where it's running, where when we have information here, allow us really to go to a predictive maintenance. Even from my side, actually, it's the first times that I hear from Tommy is a new kind of perspective maintenance. It's good to know that there are already further developments from the predictive maintenance. But yes, on our side, all these data, as I mentioned, so every kind of data which is really linked to each components of the machines will enable really to have a full overview of the machines when is on production. And I think I link here again the obstacle here again is sometimes from the other side that they don't really be open to disclose anything here. And this can be then a limit, of course. And what we are establishing from our side, it's really some terms and conditions where we said, okay, every party is owner of its intellectual property rights, but we need a full license and access and use of certain data, which actually do not, on the other side, compromise or limit the ownership of data. So there is not a transfer of ownerships in our terms and conditions, but more we are moving on a license. And here actually for us is also important to collaborate, and we are doing also already in Switzerland with certain associations, but also exactly to a level of European, to really try to have a kind of commitments between associations, between tool manufacturers, between customers, to really have a very equitable positions between the parties. And this probably allow the trust between customer and supplier and sub-suppliers to more be open to an exchange of data in view of really efficiency and a shift of even productions, energy efficiency, also towards to a certain corporate social and responsibility concept, which are also in our actually goals for the futures.
Okay, so
May I have Tommy here. May I have a few comments also related to what data to share? Of course, I'm looking at this from integrator point of view, from a system integrator point of view, because we're dealing with different brands of machine tools, different brands of all kinds of also auxiliary devices that are running together with the machine tools. So then there are in practice for example, the interfaces to machine tools are not standardized in a way, and they are not similar in all the resources. So we're not from the system level, we are not able to get similar type of data from all the resources, or even data at all. We can basically get the machine status pretty easily. That's something that can be kind of hacked out of the machines if there are no interfaces. But then to get more detailed data, for example, of how the machine is actually running in details from different axes or something like that, that would be needed for the prescriptive maintenance. That's extremely difficult, actually, because as an integrator, we need to, like I said, we need to be able to work with different kind of machine tool brands.
Yeah.
And those are not on the same level.
Yes.
Or they don't have the similar interfaces. The interfaces are not available, or the interfaces to get an interface, even for example to a new machine tool, would be extremely expensive for the customer. And then it's pretty difficult to kind of argument the need for this kind of an interface to get the data out of machine tool. What's the kind of what's the return on investment on that case? In practice.
And what amount of data we are talking about? Is it real-time data? Is it even streaming data, or is it static data, or can it even be aggregated data?
Of course, ultimately it could be streaming real-time data, but it's not needed, to be honest, at the moment. I would be really happy to get even some level of data, even aggregated data, in many cases.
Okay.
It's just kind of from the practical point of view, coming from the machining workshop with different machine tool brands and trying to integrate all those as in a working system, automated system.
Yes, and in the chat, I have now PIH. Don't know. With project, collaborative project. I don't know if he wants to come in. Damir, if we have the possibility to ask the contributor to come in. And second one is from Frederick. Should we put the emphasis on the interoperability with initiatives like Umati? So do we have first to talk about the interoperability and the standards before we talk about data sharing? How important is this, Tommy, Luigi?
Yeah, I think Umati is a good initiative. It's a good starting point for creating a more universal interface to the machine tools. Of course, the functionality at the moment is still limited to a one-way information transfer, which is not sufficient for example, automation purposes. But as an initiative, I think it's very, very promising. And I agree that we should put more emphasis on the interoperability. Absolutely, even more.
Yeah, I confirm also from our point of view. Actually, we are also here in this partnership with Mati and in the group. Our technicians, even for us, as I mentioned before, it's really important to participate in these full associations, and there's a full commitment within European company stakeholders and etc. And yeah, I fully agree also with Tommy says, and to put more emphasis here.
Okay, then as we are still coming to the end. Now, can we identify embryonic data spaces? We have heard some examples, and especially Tommy said that we have some of these big initiatives that maybe can't are even slow or can't directly address the needs of a specific sector good enough. So do we have more focused embryonic data spaces that you have in mind? Tommy, you mentioned in Finland that you have.
Yeah, we have the index program, which is running under the intelligent industry ecosystem. And I would say that index and the common data space there is kind of an embryonic data space, because it's within Finland. So that could be a good kind of a seed starting point for something bigger. But I think it's also important to link and to network these kind of smaller embryonic initiatives, because I bet there are more around Europe taking place, or something like similar, like what we do in Index.
Okay, and so what would be the best way to make them more visible, to connect them better? Do you have any ideas on that?
I think this event is a good opportunity to share information of what's happening, what's taking place in various places.
Okay, so webinars, stakeholder events, but maybe also kind of discussion spaces, I don't know, yeah.
Matthias, if I may come in here for a second.
Yes.
I guess this is a question to Tommy, to explain a bit more about Index. I don't think it is indeed very well known to all participants here, but could you say what Index has done? For instance, did it define common data standards, common data formats for exchanging data? Did they define, for instance, some governance rules on who could be part of this? What to do with the data after it is shared, whether to delete it after a number of days or something like this. So did they go into that direction? Could you please explain a bit?
Not that deep, I think. I think one of the ideas would be to utilize the IDS reference architecture in this case, which I think is a good idea. But I have to say that I'm not that much into the details of what's taking place at the moment in this program. But that's for sure something I can find out in more details.
Okay, so from the attendees, are there other initial embryonic data spaces that you have in mind that you want to propose? It seems that we can't unmute you, but we can read what you write in the chat, and then present it to the audience.
Indeed, participants can just intervene through the chat feature.
Thank you, Damir. And well, a demo during EMO 2019 was already done. So Umati is already known, but if you not only think about the standard, but also about uptake possibilities to implement this first on a pilot base and then implement it in a real environment, what could be other starting points. Don't know if you have any further ideas on that, on when then we take the next and last question. As Ariane presented in the beginning, one part in the Digital Euro program under the AI topic is also the implementation of the so-called AI testing and experimentation facilities. So if you're talking about data spaces, this is not only about collecting data, sharing data, making them available, but it's also, of course, to develop analytical tools that make use of this data. And here we see also this AI test and experimentation facilities as an opportunity to better test such applications, AI tools. And I don't know how much you are aware of this AI testing and experimentation facilities. Here we think about setting them up also in different application areas in the manufacturing. Do you have any ideas what would be the link? Do you see this application development already part of the data space as IDS, for example, does it? Or do you think that's more sector oriented and should be done sector by sector? Any views on that? Luigi, maybe start with you.
Yeah, actually, yes, could be interesting here for us. Actually, we do. From my perspective, I do not really have experience on here, but of course, direct link for testings, experimentation facilities, share between the parties, access to certain data, data room, and etc. could be clearly interesting for seeing further developments also, and to facilitate also with an exchange of experience between the parties to better understand also how the other parties are doing, and what also we can more develop internally and to standardize between the parties. That of course could be a good opportunity.
Okay, and in the chat there's also another initiative mentioned, Atlas, which is an initiative in agriculture facilitated by the Fraunhofer Institute. We'll also have a look at this, but we're already very late in time. So, well, it seems that we have chosen the wrong tool for a very lively discussion, but I think it was also in this setting very useful for us. And I now would like to hand over to Kai Peters from VDMA, who will now make a kind of a reflection. And so normally we have to do it on our own, and I'm very happy that we will now have the support from Kai in see what can be made out of that what we have heard already. So yeah, thanks Kai, and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matthias, and also thank to all of you for participating and providing these ideas. Maybe I start with trying to make the link to the discussion we had at the beginning, started by Kilian and also by other participants. I think the key word is still trust, what we talk about. But after the discussion, I think we should expand a little bit this idea of trust a little bit beyond the usual discussion around cybersecurity, confidentiality, or protection of IPR. Because also from the comments, from the two examples, and also from the experience we have in VDMA, what we hear from our companies, what is also important to increase the trust in the commercial feasibility and the business model which is created by data exchange. What I mean with that, I think the discussion for me has confirmed that data exchange is to a certain extent a question of, let's call it, transaction cost we still have. We heard there's a diversity in the systems used by the customers. There's still the issue to have relatively cost intensive adaptation to the interfaces. So I think it's important to have also let's say the commercial feasibility in mind, and that requires, of course, to include the customer of machinery companies into the picture, because I think there lies the key for more data exchange. This is evident to a certain extent, but I think it should not be forgotten that we don't only have the machinery company, we have also a wide range of customers with expectations and with own ideas, and we have to somehow take this into account. A second thought which came to my mind during the discussion is that we have to take into account not only the technical diversity and issues on the customer side, we need also somehow to reduce the complexity of the contractual side. What we experience, because there are a lot of customers with different expectations, that there is, and currently we are of course using mostly contractual agreements to sort out these questions, but this is of course not a very efficient way. So that's why I think we should in parallel also think about ideas, methods, agreements, how we can reduce the complexity on this side. And in this context, I think I would also like to try to give an answer to the question on the last slide concerning what might be a first step concerning agreements. I think a good first step could be to try to work on a framework for the legal questions, a type of code of conduct or a framework. There are some examples available, I think, from the agricultural industry, but also in VDMA we have made a try to create some guidance, and building upon this experience, maybe a first step could be to come together and to fix a first set of rules and some cornerstones for how this exchange of data can work on the governance level. A third observation, I think, which is also not new, I think we have to, it was also mentioned before, to take into account the specific requirements of smaller companies, in particular because it's our experience that the issue is very often that you cannot, let's say, hedge or the risk of investments in digital technologies. A big company can start 10 projects, and if 2 are successful, it's okay. Smaller companies very often only have to take a decision for 1, maybe 2 projects, investments, and that's why I think it's so important to create reference cases, best practices, examples, showcases, which also help to increase the awareness and decision basis for smaller companies. And that's then also my conclusion. I think that these ideas to create these embryonic data spaces and to make really the lessons learned also available for a broader community, I think is an excellent idea to bring this data exchange forward. Oh, thank you very much. That was basically my thoughts, which came to my mind during the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Kai, for this valuable remarks, but it's not my role to comment on that because we now have the conclusions from Philip and Kilian, and I would recommend that we start with Philip on the conclusions of today's webinar. And yes, so please, Philip, take the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthias. So I think most has been, of course, said now by Kay, and I'm expecting also that Kilian will still contribute to that. I agree with the analysis that Kay made about the importance of trust. Also, of course, the complexity of the contractual side. And yes, let's fix a framework on these legal questions. And of course, also it's important this specific requirements to take into account for small and medium-sized companies, 80% of the machine tool companies, so the supplier side in this issue, are really small and medium-sized companies. For the rest, I think I just have to thank the European Commission for this initiative in general and for setting up this kind of webinars to inform and but also to consult stakeholders. And as it has been said, it is also a mean to identify embryonic data spaces. So I think that's in line with your objective. So I also would like to say thanks to our member companies. For me, I think it was very useful. And we learned, for example, about a new word, quite new for me, prescriptive maintenance. So you see there's quite some outcome of this initiative. Now let us pursue a policy framework that stimulates the uptake of data-driven business models in Europe. I can only repeat that it's central to supporting business growth, technological development, and also social well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. And now with the conclusions and also important what the Commission is planning as next step, Kilian, please.
Thanks, Matthias, and thanks to the other speakers and to Ariane and to, of course, to Philip and to Luigi and Tomi for the interventions, and then, of course, for Kai for the reflections. I can indeed as well largely subscribe to what Kai has said. So he has, I think, done a good part of my work to wrap up. I think the key words he mentioned, trust, of course, essential. We need to create a business model. We must create win-win situations where the different participants in these data spaces clearly see added value from joining. On the complexity of the contractual arrangements, I think there the Commission has identified this problem. As I said in the beginning, we still plan this year to come out with a data governance act, and I think this should be the place to solve a number of the issues and to provide some clarity on some of the issues that should help on this point considerably. And then, yeah, smaller companies, we need to take them on board, and therefore we need as well to look into their specific needs. So I think that would for me be the key conclusions. It was very interesting to hear that we have already some embryonic data spaces, because we would now like as well to move very quickly from theory to practice and to start a bit of a bottom-up approach that we try first data spaces. We heard a bit about, it was interesting for me that big data spaces may solve a lot of problems and may be very ambitious, but tend to be rather slow. And smaller ones, of course, are less inclusive and comprehensive. So we will try to set up some models. We will do so hopefully rather soon once the Digital Euro program is finally adopted, which depends on the multi-annual financial framework. As I said in my beginning, to close the parenthesis, we hope that this will be the case shortly after summer. Then we will have the work program already discussed with member states around mid-September, and that will, of course, then allow us to do the first calls in the first half of next year. We don't have an exact timing for obvious reasons at this stage, because we still depend on the final agreement, because we can only start this work in detail once we have a clear approval of the financial envelope which we can use. And this, of course, depends on the overall decision. But I think, as I said, due to the successful European summit before the summer break, we're a big step further, and we are much more optimistic now when we look at autumn. We will continue this dialogue. So I'm a bit sorry that you could not really, that the intervention, the discussion was a bit difficult due to the technical obstacles, but please feel free to contact us, Matthias and others during the summer break if you want to continue the dialogue. We will do so in any case. We will have further webinars on the supply chain management and another one with IT and solution providers. So we will continue this dialogue, and we would be happy to continue to receive your views on this. For today, we will share the presentations and the recording of the webinar, I understand. So you will then have access to all the information which was provided today. So that could be then as well a basis for further reflection. If you then, on the basis of the slides, have second thoughts, don't hesitate to contact us. We are always happy to receive your feedback now or at a later stage. This being said, I would like to conclude by thanking CECIMO and VDMA for their support throughout this cooperation. I would like to thank all participants for taking the time to join. I would like to thank my colleagues, in particular Arjan and Matthias, for setting this up. And I hope to speak to and listen to you soon. And before that, get safely through the summer, and let's stay connected. Thanks a lot for today.